Purple hair is awesome. Okay. All right. So, for my assignment, thank you for sitting down with me.
You're welcome.
This is Jamie Stone, and she is a second-year teacher, just completing her second year, and we are going to chat about teacher burnout versus demoralization in the schools. So the first thing I'm going to do is explain to you what that is. So I read an article called Teacher Burnout and Demoralization, What's the Difference and Why It Matters. This article highlights the difference between these two things being teacher burnout is that you personally can't handle what's being thrown at you. You can't handle the kids, you have poor classroom management, you haven't taken care of yourself so that you are able to handle the day-to-day life of being a teacher. It really puts a lot of personal responsibility onto the professional as to why they have failed. The idea that's a shift now is this idea of demoralization, that we are not valued in our profession, whether that be by our admins, our society, by our parents. And so everything that we have learned and all of the education we have put into our profession goes to the wayside because we have red tape. We have standardized tests. We have curriculum that's scripted. We have things that keep us from doing what we know in the profession to be best for our students. So I thought you, as a new teacher, would be a very interesting perspective to have on this, being that most people leave the profession in the first 5 years. 50% of educators right now leave the profession in the first 5 years. So as just hearing that little bit, what do you think would be the reason that if you were to leave the profession? Would it be burnout, like you haven't taken care of yourself? Would it be more of a demoralization, like you can't do what's best for your students?
I think with me being in such a specific type of classroom, being a deaf plus classroom, deaf with additional disabilities, mine would be pretty equal of burnout and demoralization. Burnout because my students have such complicated needs and I don't always know what's best for them and what to do for them, and that, like, any teacher can say that this is not a job that you just leave work and you go home and you live your life. Like, you take your work home with you, even if you're not actually doing work at home. Like, you are thinking about your students constantly, and especially with the students that I have, I'm constantly thinking about them. So I think that would be one, is that I don't necessarily feel like I'm always trained to handle the situations, but then on top of that, like the demoralization, I'm not always trained to handle the situations that I encounter. And then also I'm still required to do things like standardized testing, and my students are so low functioning that these type of tests are pointless and it doesn't make sense for them and it doesn't show what they can do. And I feel like a lot of these tests aren't always designed for students with the ability level that my students have.
Right.
So I think that it would probably be pretty evenly distributed between the two.
So when you do standardized tests for your kids that you say are not equal, and I do understand this because, of course, I teach kids with special needs, so we are in the same boat, kind of, in the fact that we're asked to do things that are just kind of ridiculous sometimes. Mm-hmm. We are lucky that we don't have a curriculum that we necessarily have to follow. We get to come up with our own, but also that creates a level of burnout, not demoralization, but burnout in the fact that, like, when you're coming up with 100% of your day from scratch, that wears you out and wears you thin.
And it's stressful.
It's very stressful. And then the added layer of then there's all of these silly things that don't fit our students that we have to do that are not really appropriate. That kind of brings in that demoralization of not being able to say, hey, this isn't appropriate for my kids. Well, too bad, you're going to do it anyways. So when you're doing that with your kids, what kind of attitude do you take towards it? Do you feel like, whatever, I don't care, I'm going to just get through this and then carry on with my day? Do you really try to make it so your students can access that test and try to do it? How do you feel like those two elements play to each other with what decisions you make with your students?
Well, as a second-year teacher, I haven't had the opportunity to distribute a ton of standardized tests, so I've done the DLM twice now, and with it, I started out trying to approach it with a very positive attitude, trying to do it, and then like as we've got further into the test, and I realized that there are accommodations that I'm not allowed to make or I can't do just based on the way that the test is designed. It's frustrating, and I don't give up. I mean, we still go through the test, but it's
A little
it doesn't make
demoralizing.
sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense for my students to do it, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for them, and it's frustrating for me to try to give it to them.
Right. And so it's kind of, I have that too. Like, we're a little demoralized in the fact that it's like, okay, well, even though we know that even on this test,